Hello landlords, Joy here. Today I wanted to share why I finally left Apartments.com. For the past several years, I had been using their platform mainly for rent collection, but as I continued to use the site, I discovered several nagging pain points as I ran my business. I knew what I wanted in a rent collection system, I just needed to search to cure my pain points. I had 6 pain points. I needed a fast funding time, I needed to be able to collect automated daily late rent, ease to add additional bills, like for utilities or other default charges. I wanted an electronic lease signing. I wanted to be able to customize my application if possible, and I really wanted it to be free for both the landlord and the tenant. Let me touch on why I stayed with Apartments.com. When I started landlording, I originally used Cozy as my go-to platform, but when Cozy merged with Apartments.com a few years ago, thought that I would give them a try since I had nothing else lined up. The main reason I stayed with Apartments.com is that rent collection is free for both parties. It is free for me to use, and it's free for my renter to pay, and I am of the belief that tenants should not have to pay rent. I still feel this way, and whenever I looked at other rent collection systems, I found that usually someone had to bear the burden of the payment transaction. The second reason I initially liked Apartments.com was that they provided a state-specific lease. As a newbie getting started, this sounded like a great idea. Most landlords know or have been advised that they should get a lease from a lawyer who can provide a strong document. The attorney can even look over and tweak one you can provide to them, but most newbie landlords don't want to incur this expense right out of the gate. This was me, and so having a state-specific lease readily provided sounded great. However, I would learn to regret this. The third reason I liked Apartments.com was that it had e-signing capabilities. Having this feature was a huge plus and made document signing and delivery super easy and efficient. The catch was that in order to use this service, I had to use an Apartments.com lease. I struggled with this at first, but ultimately decided that my old school way of signing documents needed to be upgraded. I used to sign my leases in person, after of course printing out copious amounts of pages, and I knew this was not ideal, so signing everything automatically electronically sounded like a great step up. The fourth reason that I stayed with Apartments.com was that they allowed partial rent payments. While this meant much more to my renters than to me, I liked the flexibility I was able to offer the tenant, and I knew some of my tenants loved this feature too. And the last reason I stayed was customer support. If I had a question, I could either search a vast database and see if I could find my answer, or during business hours, I could phone customer support. This database was hit and miss for me, so I was happy to be able to connect with a live person. The operators were always nice and mostly helpful, and this service came in handy when I had a few random questions pop up, and also I had an instance where my tenant was not the most computer savvy and he had to call and get help. So this was a nice service to have. So for those reasons, I hung out with Apartments.com for many years, but as I became more knowledgeable about landlording and I had acquired more properties, I discovered that free or not, I needed to find solutions to my growing list of pain points. This brings me to the first reason I left Apartments.com: funding time. As with many rent collection platforms, there are a few ways for your tenant to pay rent and transfer money with Apartments.com. This can be accomplished via credit card or via ACH or bank transfer. If the tenant pays with a credit card, this transaction is relatively fast, about 2 to 3 business days, and the tenant will also likely incur an insane fee, like about 3% of the transaction. But this is entirely normal judging from other platforms. Most rent collection service providers will openly admit that these charges are the main revenue source for the company. When the renter pays via ACH or automatic cash handling with Apartments.com, this is free, but this transaction can take up to 8 business days to complete. This is a really long time for a landlord to wait. But let's be clear here, it is not that I'm a greedy and desperate landlord and I need or want my money as fast as possible, although I'm not gonna lie, this would be great for cash flow purposes when paying the mortgage. No, that's not the issue. The issue is the unscrupulous tenant who knowingly initiates false transactions or transactions they know will fail due to insufficient funds in their account. When these reprobate tenants initiate failed transactions, they are buying themselves time. They know the transaction will fail, but you don't, and by the time you figure this out, a week has passed. Now, don't get me wrong, during this time the landlord could issue a default for non-payment of rent, but this may be difficult to swallow when you believe the payment is pending and so could possibly be valid. You could be justified in issuing a default, or you could create a strained relationship with your tenant for nothing. Either way, waiting 8 days for payment to clear or not to clear is painful and a difficult way to operate. Free ACH or not, I could not tolerate such lengthy transaction times. The second reason I left was automated late fees. For whatever reason, Apartments.com does not support daily late fees. I'm wondering if this has to do with certain states not allowing this practice, but this is extremely frustrating. Sure, tenants could be 1 day late with rent, but usually it is not just 1 day late, and it is usually not just 1 month they are late. As a landlord, depending on your state, you have the right to collect a certain amount of late fees based on the rent amount. For example, in Texas, landlords can charge up to 12% of the rent in late fees for a single family unit. This can be a lot of money. With Apartments.com, you can automate 1 day late fee, just one. If your tenant continues to be late, you, the busy landlord, must manually go in and enter or add the late fee to the account. Right, because everyone has time for that. Also, every landlord knows that automating late fees is crucial to running their business efficiently. If your tenant pays at 12:01 a.m., you want the late fee to be firmly in place to be sure to capture any and all late charges you are owed. Number 3, late pay notification. In connection with the 1 day late fee is the one-time late fee notification email. Apartments.com will send only one late fee notification email, just one. And this makes sense in line with the one-time automated late charge. So if your tenant blows off the single late payment email, again, you, the busy landlord, have to follow up with your own method of communication to try to elicit payment. Each time you manually enter a late fee, Apartments.com will issue an email letting your tenant know unpaid charges are due, but this is not efficient and not always effective. It would be nice to be able to issue multiple reminder emails automatically. Number 4, adding a bill. Speaking of adding a fee, when you add a fee or a bill to the tenant's account, for instance a utility bill, the tenant has to make a separate payment. So if your tenant initiates automatic rent payment, music to every landlord's ear, they would still need to go in and manually pay the bill you added, which kind of negates the reason they automated their rent payment in the first place. And since rent is automated, it is very easy for a tenant to forget to go in manually. It would be nice to have an option to include other bills as part of their auto pay system. Also, late fees are only active and only apply to rent charges, not non-payment of other monthly fees. Again, you have no control over this. The 5th reason I left Apartments.com was insufficient lease. Next to funding time, this lease is another big issue of contention for me. While it may sound terrific on the surface to have a lease prepared and provided, now that I'm a bit more experienced with landlording, I realize having a stamped lease, state-specific or not, is not a good way to operate. The lease provided is advertised as having been drafted by experienced state attorneys, so you can believe you are getting an airtight document, but you are not. Many essential clauses are missing from this rental agreement. For example, lawn care and snow removal are not addressed at all. Who handles these? The landlord? The tenant? No one? These huge items don't appear at all in the agreement. Number 6, prep in advance. Apartments.com does not allow you to prepare any document in advance. Everything involves around entering the tenant's information first, and then you can begin to set up other elements. As a new user to the platform, you want to get used to working with the platform as much as possible before you get a tenant, but this is not possible. With Apartments.com, you are constantly figuring out how to do things as you go, which for me makes me stressed out because I like to be prepared as possible for my tenants. And I would like the opportunity to quote-unquote play around with the site and learn its features in advance. The seventh pain point I had was the lack of flexibility when beginning a lease term. You cannot begin a tenancy as a month-to-month term. You must always begin a lease with a fixed set of dates. In my opinion, this is extremely inflexible for certain situations. Also, if this is the stipulation, this information should be stated when creating the lease, so newbies like me don't tear all their hair out on a Sunday night when customer service is not available, only to call the next day to find out that it can't be done at all. And the last reason I parted ways with Apartments.com is that when you create and sign an Apartments.com lease, you must sign as a person and not an entity. Knowing what I know now, this is a terrible idea, legal-wise. If you have a company, your company should be the one signing the lease. You can sign as an agent, but this is now how it works with Apartments.com. Also, Apartments.com requires that landlords provide within the lease their address. Now, if you already have a P.O. box or an alternative place to collect mail, and you don't want your tenant to throw eggs at your house in the middle of the night, this is great. But for those landlords who don't have a P.O. box or alternative address, you are stuck entering your personal address within the lease. Not cool. So for these reasons, I left Apartments.com. Again, my main motivation was looking for other solutions with the slow funding time. But when adding all of these pain points, I needed to check out other rent collection platforms. Hope this was helpful, fellow landlords.